Today, we are speaking with Ryan George, CMO of DocuPace. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Sarah. Happy to be here.
Great. And before we get started, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Brian George. I'm the CMO at DocuPace. I've been here since September 2020, which in CMO world makes me extended. I've had a long tenure here, coming up on 5 years. I've been in the marketing and communications within the wealth management, mutual fund investment space my entire career, going on a little bit more years than I would like to say, but it's been great. It's something that I've been able to find an industry where I'm super passionate about it, but also can use my skills in order to help people live more, have a stronger financial planning structure for themselves.
That's great. I'm so the opposite. I've worked in multiple different industries. And so I could only imagine what it'd be like to, stay in one for so long. You really get to know it very, very well.
I started out working directly with the fund provider. Then I switched to a broker dealer where we basically worked directly with financial advisors that work with clients. And now I'm on the tech side, providing technology to advisors who work with clients. So while I've been able to stay within the same space, it definitely been able to access through different perspectives.
Very cool. So let's start with the big picture. Can you give an overview of DocuPace and your role as CMO there now, and what drew you to the wealth management tech space in the first place?
Sure. So CMO is a large role, especially at our company. Um, does covers everything from traditional marketing, also PR, market research, internal, external communications. We do industry insights. So we run our customer insights program as well as industry insights programs. We do brand awareness, corporate strategy. So we wear many hats in my department, which is good. But one of the things that I say often is I've tried to structure our group to be sort of the State Department within the business. And what I mean by that is we are often the people that other departments come to when they want to take their initiative public or polish up what they're doing. And so we definitely serve our internal customers just as much as we serve the external customers. And from a sales, marketing, lead generation basis, we spend a lot of time helping our internal partners, get their new initiative off the ground. And that's something that we have been intentional about focusing on.
That's really cool. And how big is your team?
So I have a small team. So it's myself and three others. We're one of the smaller companies in the smaller departments in the company, but we do plug into agencies. So I have an outside team with a team called Comma. Wheels Up is an outside agency that we use for digital and for design and some strategy. And then we have a partner PR firm in Haven Tower that we use. That's how I've structured the team to be small internal, with a plug into external resources as needed.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk about the sector a little bit. It's continuing evolving. I think tech is becoming more important in it. And so what current trends that you're observing right now and, how do they influence the need and development for, these kind of digital platforms, and where do you see AI kind of playing a role?
Yeah, so I think we're just coming off of or coming to the close of what I would call phase two for wealth tech. So that's phase one was sort of initial, sort of late aughts into sort of 2020, 2021. And that was, excuse me, first generation was late aughts into like say 2015. And then 2015 to 2021, we started to today, we started having sort of the second iteration. And that's where like new levels of leadership, the companies were more mature. So it was less startup as key players. And you sort of had these pillars for them to place, which is financial planning software, a CRM, and some sort of portfolio accounting, portfolio administration software were these big pillars that, if you wanted to be in the business, you had to have. Now, I think with AI, we're moving into this next generation of wealth tech, or at least the next phase of wealth tech, where AI will help drive a lot more efficiency. And so people will need to be a lot more careful on how they apply AI to their business and where they spend their time. Because I think one of the fallacies that happens with technology is, well, I can give you Sarah back, 2 hours every day. But that doesn't ensure that Sarah actually spends those 2 hours wisely, right? It just gives you the time back. And so I think finding ways to not only use AI to make yourself more efficient, but using AI to better use your time and to focus your attention, I think is something that we haven't seen yet, but I think that will be a big focus in this next few years.
Yeah, you make a good point. Like you get the time back, but really is that time being used wisely?
And often it may not be, but I think part of it is also time and effort, right? So like DocuPace, we help digitize manual tasks, right? And so the ability to take manual tasks that are cumbersome and people don't like doing, and taking those off the table and letting that person focus on stuff that they maybe are more passionate and more, have at their heart in, can actually lead to, better feelings about their job and better feelings about their position and better feelings about their career. And I think those things are important to us.
Well, that's a good segue into the next question where we dive into the platform a little bit. And, you know, DocuSpace offers features like advisor transitions and compliance support. How do these solutions address specific pain points faced by financial advisors and firms today?
Yeah, well, I'll start with advisor transitions because that's something that's actually been a hot topic lately. There's never been more movement in the industry than there is today. And the reason there is that technology like DocuPace has made the pain of moving smaller. In the past, you would have paper-based applications. So with an advisor who has, say, 250 clients, if they wanted to move to a different provider, they would likely have to go and get new account applications for each one of those 250 clients and signed, hand paperwork, go meet with them and do so. That's a very, very painful process that advisors hate to do. They hate getting in front of clients for the only reason is to be transactional. So what DocuPace, the transitions program, helps expedite that process to take it anywhere, which generally been 6 months to around 60 days or less, depending on the book of business. And that's been helpful for us because it helps the recruiting firm get the advisor's clients on the new platform quickly and as fast and efficiently as possible. But also it takes a lot of the fear out of the advisor moving businesses. So by the time they come to us, they've already made the decision that they want to move to a new provider. And all we're doing is help facilitating that move. That decision's already made. We just want to make sure to get them over the hill as soon as possible. So that's been one thing that I think has been really beneficial for us and for the clients we serve. The compliance piece is it's interesting because regulations tend to go up, not down, meaning today there will never be more regulations than there are today, and tomorrow they'll likely have never more regulations than they did today, right? It's just going to continue to move upward. And so we have tools like our compliance tracker and even our books and records solution and our surveillance solution that do two things. One, they help prevent bad things from happening. So they make sure that the regulations are fulfilled, but it also creates an audit trail for when a compliance regulator or examiner comes in and wants to verify that this activity passed the muster, and we can be able to easily pull that data. So those are sort of the two things that we do. And I think because we are specialized within the wealth management space, we tend to have a deeper knowledge of what those compliance rules are. And so have built those sort of bumpers in order to guide people down that.
It's almost like a partner. So you're helping them, make their lives easier and going to a new business, and compliance in any business is a challenge, just knowing what the new regulations are each year and how to implement them and making sure that you're on top of submitting all your compliance reports on time every year.
Absolutely. And something that's interesting. So right now, probably the biggest adoption of a new technology within the space is basically an AI-based note taker. And what's interesting for me, and we haven't seen it play out yet, which is we'll create a record of the advisors maybe saying something or recommending to the client. But it's also going to create a record, which we don't have today, whether the client is understanding what they're saying. And the reason I bring that up is I was recently looking at Allianz study of like different things that an advisor had covered with their client, and then the same clients described what the advisor had covered with them, and there was a huge gap. And so I would be interesting to see how the regulators view that. And now that you have evidence for proof or recording that this conversation took place, like how do you decide whether it was actually the uptake was strong versus what the advisor was saying, or even if they covered it at all? Just those are the things that the wrinkles that AI puts in, the new technologies put in, but in the end, they'll be very helpful.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed with DocuPace is that its strategy has a lot to do with acquisitions. And so, I saw that you recently acquired a company called Hubly, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that. What is your DocuPace's strategy to integrate and leverage these additional offerings to provide value to clients? Because a lot of the times it's just kind of operates as two companies initially, and then over time they find ways to integrate. So how do you guys do that?
Well, I'll answer the second part first because I think that's an interesting point. So we've acquired 3 companies since I've been here, and 2 of the companies we've kept the brand and run them as separate brands. Another one that we folded and tucked in completely into DocuPace. And I think that's done on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the end goal of the product will be. If it's all going to be a part of a unified product, generally doesn't make sense to keep a third, an additional brand because it's all organized as one. But like with Hubly and in the case of our 2021 acquisition with Precise FP, both had a following and a market presence that we thought and still continue to believe that there's brand equity in the marketplace that we didn't want to, demolish, bring them in. And so with the recent acquisition with Hubly, we're basically creating two platforms. So DocuPace historically will be the large enterprise platform that will serve the largest of the largest in the wealth management industry, whereas Precise P and Hubly, which are more nimble and also more lower end on the price point standpoint, but they have lots of horsepower. They're just, not as enterprise ready, serve the field use. So for instance, if an advisor is in their office in Des Moines, Iowa, but their home office is in, California, the California home office would use DocuPace, whereas the field office in Des Moines would more leverage Precise IP and Hubly. So that's how we're separating the two. As far as overall acquisition strategy, I think we're definitely looking to make more acquisitions and be pretty strategic in doing so. I think one of the things is we want to make sure we've decided sort of who we are and who we aren't. So we don't want to be a CRM. We don't want to be a financial planning tool. We want to be sort of the connective tissue that connects all the sort of operation stuff to those tools. And so there's a lot of different processes that need to happen. You mentioned compliance. Compliance is a big part of the back office processes. And so, trying to look at the market and see what's available is one way. One of the things we want to look at is companies that are doing well or sort of being effective in how they're deploying cash. I don't think we're interested in companies that are in a heavy burn period, like in the startup phase. That's not generally where we're looking. We're looking for more of the people who have an established business and have proven to show that they're running it effectively. I think that that's probably the right space for us to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's just talk a little bit about customers. I'm sure as part of your job, you interact with them a lot. So maybe you can share a success story, where DocuPace significantly streamlined a process for a client or, a big win.
Sure. So one of our biggest customers, our largest customers, a couple of years ago, partnered with us, Salesforce, and a couple others to really overhaul their system. And I think the biggest takeaway from that was they took 26 systems down to one. So they had, 26 systems doing different pieces of a process. We were able to synchronize that into a single system, which is a big win in itself. But we were able to take a heavily paper-based process and take it to where 70% of account volumes are fully digitized, which is a huge win as well, because that takes, the biggest thing is there's less errors in the paperwork. So we'll take the NIGO rate from NIGO is an industry term, so it's not in good order, meaning it gets returned. It doesn't get processed and completed. Take that down into the single digits, down from say 30 to 40%. And then we're able to, like the horsepower of the platform, we're able to do high volume. So again, the same partner does normally, more than 300,000 transactions in a single year. And we process more than 1 million documents in a year for them. So that's there's not a whole lot of systems out there that can handle that type of volume. And that's just one of our clients that uses the system. So I think in summarizing, it's taking the business and making it smaller. So less technology, which means there's less risk in the system, less of cyber risk or breaking down risk or whatever risk, less friction points, but also making sure that once it's in a single space that it can flow through more effectively and make sure it gets routed to the right person right effectively at the right time, and taking out sort of I would say taking the thought out of the processes. People can complete the task that they need and not have to sort of ask questions or send it back.
Right. Just simplifies the manual workflows or basically eliminates it, which is great. And speaking of customers, I think DocuPace has been around for a while. How are you going out and finding new customers today?
Yeah, so that's a big part of my job. We do all the things. So I would say, so we've been in business for 23 years. We're very lucky to have a very loyal customer base who we try to treat as best and as perfectly as possible. We are a work in progress company, but we do try to do our best in every interaction, in every service. I think part of it is upmarket and downmarket and side markets. From the upmarket standpoint, seen interest in larger clients coming on these past couple of years. And I think part of that is our two things. One, our focus on execution. So really being able to deliver on the promises that we made. The second of it being, don't make promises that you can't fulfill on. So that's a twofold thing that I think is really important. And then the third of it being, there has been some degradation of competition in the space so that we become more of a destination point for others. That's how we've sort of cemented ourselves as a market leader. So that's helped on the upside. On the downside, bringing in tools like Hubly and Precise AP have been able to help us expand down market, so serve the sort of the greater many that sit below sort of the large enterprise set. I think there's more than 2,000 firms that are somewhere like in the $1 billion camp in the RA space. So that's quite a few that we can go and serve. And then side channel is, how do we expand into more into serving banks and credit unions? How do we spend more into serving insurance companies and others that are in the wealth space, but not as traditionally in the independent broker dealer space that we've served? So that I hope that's clear. But I think that's as far as differentiation. I think goes back to what I said before, which is be who you are and not describe yourself as such. And so be clear on what you offer and don't try to oversell. We definitely try to not drown our customers or prospects in features because everybody's got these features that they say they can do, but also really try to approach it as a true partner. So we try to come as building businesses together and not as, oh, we just want to sell you something. And I think that has helped build our reputation for where it's at today. And I think something that we'll even be spending more time on. That all said, we use all the other marketing techs, marketing automation. I use ChatGPT for other, content creation and other tasks. We definitely have a pretty robust tech stack in place, but I think it really comes down to, do I know this firm? Do I trust this firm? Can this firm help me with my pay?
Okay, cool. And you did mention, differentiation, and the one thing that I, really heard that stood out was like you're a partnership. How else would you differentiate yourself in the market?
I think, and also finding ways where our unique expertise and having the 23 years in serving this can actually benefit the customer and demonstrating that expertise. Because I think where we get in trouble or where anybody gets in trouble is if we're talking to a potential customer or prospect or even one of our customers and we think they're understanding what we're saying, but they're not understanding what we're saying. So there's this disconnect. So finding the ways, the common ground or the common language, like any industry, this industry is drowning in acronyms, making sure that they understand what we're saying and we're actually meeting their needs. I think that's a huge part of what we do. And again, the experience in working with like-minded firms for a long time has built a pretty deep well of experience and knowledge that I think would be hard to replicate by somebody else.
And you mentioned that there's actually been some consolidation in the market, right?
It's it's really interesting. So there's been a lot of investment from private equity firms and others in the market over the past decade or so, and you're starting to see in like the RA space, there's been more transactions in 24 than there ever was before, and then because there was a record in 23 that was set, and it might even have been a record in 22. So there's a lot of firms that are what we call rolling up into one. That's one way. And there's also on the large broker dealer side, there's an acquisition, generally a large acquisition, almost it feels like almost every quarter. That's making the overall number of advisors stays the same, but the overall number of providers grows smaller. And so that concentration is beneficial in some ways, give greater economies of scale for the providers, right? You can have more advisors, you can do a single thing. But the other side of it is, I think, the individual nature, or maybe even the niche provider, that group has grown smaller and smaller. And so you're finding more and more, I would say, vanilla offerings than you would have found maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
Interesting. And so do you see that as a challenge for the buyer if
Which
they all
could be,
start to kind of look alike, if it is kind of a vanilla offering?
I think it could be, but there may be people wanting to look. It's hard to tell. I think for the buyer, anytime one buyer buys another firm, I think they're always at risk of losing the advisors. Advisors want to go make their own way or do their own thing. But to me, I feel like that's built into the calculus of the deal, knowing that, hey, we're going to have 20% of the population probably isn't going to love this. We can model in that they may leave and go break out on their own, or break away on their own. So I don't see it as a problem. I see it more as this comes down to relationships, right? So you can say you're niche, but it's, am I connecting with the client? Am I providing exactly what they need or what their family needs? And I think that even at scale still comes down to human interaction.
Right. Okay. Because there's always days where things just aren't working. We always have some challenges. So, if there's one, like, what's the one thing that kind of keeps you up at night? And if you can wave a magic wand to make it go away, what would that be? What would be the implications if it's just not addressed?
Yeah, I think would say competition would be one. And here's why it's hard to fix. Competition will market themselves in the best way, meaning they'll say they do everything to the tip of tip top best they could do, and here's all the stuff they can do. Whereas if we're a current client of ours is measuring us against the reality of what we're actually delivering, and so you have a gap that I think naturally exists between my existence today versus what could be. And I think there, unfortunately, are those in the space that maybe oversell or overexpand what they actually can offer, or they'll play the game of, yeah, buy it and then I build it, which is pretty common. I was actually surprised when I moved into the tech space how common that was. And I think that's always a challenge from a marketing standpoint is I have to be truthful in what I say, but the others may not be. But so that's one thing I would say it keeps me up some. But truthfully, I think there isn't a ton. There's other great providers out there, and if they're the right partner for a firm of ours, then that's the right thing to be. I think maybe am I getting enough new eyeballs? Meaning we're 23 years in, a lot of people know the name or have interacted with us in the past or even used us in the past. How do I continue to bring fresh eyes to our sales team or into the fold that they can be interested? That those are the things that's as a marketer that's just always going to be on the top of mind. Am I getting in front of the right people? Are they new people? And where do I find them? Because nobody's ever been more distracted than people are today, and so there's never been more noise. I mean, just in this conversation, I probably got 24 emails. So like you used to be able to email or call or text, and then let's go to social. Well, there's all this noise on social. It's like, well, how do you actually find that person's attention and grab their attention and do so in a way that is professional, accurate, smart, all those things.
Yeah, that just makes me start thinking about different types of targeted campaigns and ABM campaigns and things like that.
So we try to be as targeted as possible and understand. It comes down to understanding um, the potential, the prospect. I think
Hmm.
I try to tell my team to not make too many assessments about what the prospect wants or what they need. But we do have a known, in financial services, people are licensed, so we do have a pretty good idea. The buyers of our software are licensed, so we have a pretty good idea of what their profile is. But we don't always know, right? And so trying to target to them and figure out what works. So that's the part that I think we're still working on and probably will continue to work on, which is actually leveraging our data and our experiences to get better about what we do. So like we ran this campaign, do we really drive down into who reacted to it, who didn't, and maybe why? Like we just haven't slowed down enough to really do so. I think that's something we will need to do because the data is all going to tell us exactly what we need to spend our time doing. But sometimes we can get overly focused on doing the next thing instead of looking back on the previous thing and say, what was I doing that?
Right, kind of that iterative process. Okay. Well, looking ahead, because you mentioned the next thing. So, where do you see your team and the company going over the next 6 months to 2 years? What outcomes are you looking for?
Sure. So acquisitions will be a big part of what we do. We've spoken about that. We also announced we've spent the past 18 months retooling and rebuilding our product platform for our customers. So just now we're starting the point of doing the transition from the old platform to the new. So that's what we require a lot of handholding, a lot of care, and a lot of empathy as people. We move a lot of people's cheese, right? So that's a big part of us. I think I also want to look to see where we can grow, whether that's foreign markets, if that's adjacent markets, really trying to figure out what makes most sense for us um, on the near term basis. And I think if you think about paper based applications, or at least paper based eliminating applications, I think there's lots of areas we could go. And so trying to expand, but expand in a intentional right way that um, it doesn't inhibit our core business.
Hmm.
And I think bringing in new tools. So like every year when budget comes around, I look at least 5 or 6 different new tools to see whether they're comparative to something we already have in place or it's something that's completely new. We're always looking at that as well as like our event strategy. So every year I strip our event strategy back to zero and decide which events that we want to go to. And if we have a bucket of money, how do we divide that bucket up? That's been that's been helpful as well because again, it's introduced us to new people. I think The challenge with that is there's not an immediate ROI for doing events, but there is network built, right? There are relationships that happen face to face with people. And so, trying to find that balance between what part of your budget gets you an immediate response versus what's the long term relationship building piece. And both need to be fed, right? Those are both important.
Yeah, definitely. I also find that some companies pigeonhole themselves with certain events because they feel like they have to have a presence there. So to stay competitive. And so I find that interesting that you kind of are open to creating a whole new event strategy every year.
Well, FOMO is real. So, like, if you're in say, I'll use LinkedIn for instance. So, most of your connections are going to be within your space, whether it's a partner, adjacent space, or somebody you used to work with, or a competitor, and they'll go to post all these pictures of them having fun, and you got to think back, well, what business is actually being done there? Like, hey, good, they're having a good time, but like, what business is transacting? What am I spending time doing? I think that's being okay with a little bit of FOMO helps a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the vanilla aspect of companies becoming similar as they're combining in more and more acquisitions, even within DocuPace itself. What would you offer companies who are trying to do the same thing to differentiate themselves or as they go through this acquisition process, advice that you give them on how to be successful with that?
Yeah, so I have an interesting sort of credo about it is I think with automation and AI and all this stuff that's going on in the market right now, the number one thing that makes you attractive to somebody, either whether an employer that you want to work for, whether it's somebody you want to sell to or somebody who wants to buy, is authenticity. And I think showing up as your authentic self, showing a little bit of sense of humor if you have some, showing your passions if you have some. I think that showing up in all of what you do, you can probably tell in this conversation, I'm really passionate about the people we serve and the industry we serve in. And so, like, let that shine. And I think that will stand out because that's the human connection side that I think really makes things different. It can really differentiate what you do than just a bunch of features that, like, every technology that are completely ubiquitous in the technology space. And so, like, people will talk about names. If you look, I mean, how many times do you see a list of technology companies and recognize the names? Like, never. But you might recognize the person who works there, who speaks in a way that connects with you. And I think that's probably more important than anything else.
Yeah. And I think even with all the AI hype that's coming around and that takes away a lot of the person to person interaction, I think people are going to want to have that type of interaction, especially with a sale or type of transaction that is going to be exchanging money.
We become overly reliant on AI. Like, pick on the note takers again. If I have a note taker that transcribes or takes notes for this entire meeting, what's taken out of that process is what I thought was most important from that meeting, right? So if I just go and send 2 pages of notes to my team, I'm taking my value add of, like, hey, this part that Sarah and I discussed is most important because that's what I would write down if I was manually taking the notes. So you can't fully outsource your expertise to an AI. I think you have to figure out the balance of where do you assert yourself and where do you let the tool run.
So I think we're all kind of using it to build content and we still need to like review the content to make sure that it stays on brand and has the personal touch. And people are using it right now to kind of automate the SDR. And I think they're seeing that it just really isn't quite there yet, but you definitely need to get that face to face interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think right now we have sort of extremes, right? So we're such an early phase of it. You have the people, the super adopters that think it's the greatest thing ever. And then you have sort of the detractors who are either like afraid or not that tech savvy or just don't get it. But the truth is they're both kind of right. In the middle is where you need to be, right? So, like, AI isn't for everything because can become expensive. But, like, where can you elevate that? Like, I'll use it for the first draft on a press release, right? So it takes I don't maybe I take away 70% of the words they wrote, but at least give me a framework to work with. And that's one easy way. But I think in this space, it's all been, well, AI replace the advisor. Well, no, the AI is not going to give advice. It can maybe surface a recommendation or two, but the advisor still has to use their knowledge and their knowledge of the client to best understand what that recommendation should be. And I think that we're still a ways from that of sort of the two sides coming together.
Well, and I think the advisor plays so many different roles too. I mean, a lot of times the advisor's representing multiple people in a family. And so they help out with all those dynamics as well. And I don't think an AI is ever going to take over that.
No, that's the human side of it. So an advisor, people will think the advisor is spending all their time making investment recommendations and other things, but it's really a lot of listening, a lot of understanding what the challenges are, understanding dynamics in a marriage or dynamics in a family, especially multi-generational dynamics, which can be a whole conundrum in themselves. And so I think there's a lot more to it than just the mathematical analysis of where somebody should be putting their money.
Yeah, definitely. So if somebody wanted to learn about DocuPace, can you give a little bit of information on how they might be able to get a hold of you?
I'm always on LinkedIn, so you can find me at LinkedIn, Ryan George. I'm the CMO of DocuPace. DocuPace.com has all of our executive contacts, all of our people, all of our blog and resources in there. So that's DocuPace, DocuPace, and that would be the place to start.
Sounds great. Ryan, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. It was a great conversation.